Her daughter and her slick lawyer boyfriend stole $6.7 million from her retirement fund. Eleanor Grant had built her business from scratch and signed it away out of love. They drained every account, erased her from the firm, and laughed as they moved into her future. But buried in a cedar chest was something they didn't know existed: a forgotten 1960 trust from her father. By the time they realized she now owned their firm and their mortgage, the damage was done. This wasn't revenge. It was legacy, with interest. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The conference room smelled like citrus polish and fresh paper, that sterile scent of endings. I'd sat through hundreds of negotiations in my life, but never one that felt this final. The table was long enough to seat 12, though there were only 3 of us: me, my daughter, and her boyfriend, who also happened to be my attorney. Patrick adjusted his cufflinks with the same precision he used to calculate risk. "Congratulations, Eleanor," he said, voice smooth as mahogany. "The deal's officially closed. You've done what most people only dream of." I smiled faintly, pen poised above the last page. "And now it's time to rest, apparently." Natalie leaned forward, her posture perfect, her tone somewhere between pride and impatience. "You've earned it, Mom. Let us handle the details from here." She said it like she was doing me a favor. My signature bled slightly into the page as I signed away the company I'd built from scratch. 30 years of sleepless nights, payroll stress, and tiny victories. When I slid the pen back, Patrick nodded toward the bank documents stacked neatly beside him. "Just authorization forms," he said. "They'll let us manage your post-sale distributions and investments. Keeps everything streamlined." I didn't read every line. That's the irony. For a woman who'd lived her life scrutinizing contracts, I chose to trust my daughter and her lover with the last decision that mattered. I signed them all. Patrick gathered the papers, his smile widening. "We'll make sure your future's taken care of." I remember laughing softly. "My future's in your hands, then." He met my eyes, unreadable, exactly where it belongs. The first week of retirement was quiet. I tried yoga, burned a casserole, and avoided thinking about boardrooms. Then, in the second week, my debit card declined at the grocery store. I assumed it was a bank glitch until I checked my accounts that night. The numbers looked wrong, too clean, too empty. I refreshed the page, blinking as the realization slowly reshaped itself into panic. The savings account, gone. The brokerage, closed. My business escrow, inactive due to transfer. I called Patrick. Straight to voicemail. I called Natalie. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" I tried to sound calm. "There's a problem with my accounts." She hesitated. I heard traffic behind her. "Patrick's handling everything. Don't worry." "I'm not worried," I said. "I'm asking." A sigh. "You always do this. Micromanage. Maybe it's time to let go." "Natalie, did you move my money?" There was a pause long enough to feel like a confession. "You always said you trusted me," she said quietly. "I did," I whispered. "My mistake." The line went dead. By morning, Patrick's firm denied all responsibility. His assistant's polite voice over the phone carried the final insult. "Mr. Cole no longer represents you, Mrs. Grant." I sat at the kitchen table staring at my father's old fountain pen, the one he used to sign every check in his life. Funny how legacy can shrink to a single object. Sam Rogers, my accountant for 15 years, came over that afternoon. He looked tired, carrying his laptop like a weapon. "They drained everything," he said bluntly. "Wire transfers routed through 4 accounts. Digital signatures matching yours. I could barely form words. Patrick forged them? Or Natalie? Hard to say, but they knew exactly where to hit. He closed the laptop, and the silence between us thickened. I'll do what I can to trace it, but, Eleanor, they covered their tracks. Completely. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at the city I'd worked half a lifetime to master. Boston, proud and unforgiving. Somewhere out there, my daughter was living the good life on my money, with my lawyer under my name. My throat tightened. They took my future. Sam's voice was soft. You'll get it back. I shook my head. No, I'll reclaim something better. He frowned. What's that? I turned toward him, a faint, cold steadiness replacing the ache in my chest. My history. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Detective Claire Whitman looked younger than I expected. Early 40s, hair pulled tight. A face that had learned not to react too quickly. The kind of woman who saw grief in numbers and betrayal in ink. She slid the printed bank statements across her desk. I've seen this before, she said. When family mixes with money, the law moves slower than morality. I kept my voice even. How slow are we talking? She leaned back. Tracing digital forgeries through offshore accounts? Could take years. Maybe never. The word never hit harder than it should have. I wasn't built for helplessness. Claire studied me. You're not here to cry about it, are you? I managed a small smile. Crying's a luxury I can't afford right now. Then here's the truth, she said. You can file a civil suit, but without proof of intent, it's just paper. And they have better lawyers. Patrick's firm, I said. She nodded. They'll protect their own. Her tone softened slightly. I've read your background. Self-made, no priors, clean record. You don't strike me as the type who stays down long. I stood, smoothing my coat. No, I just have to learn how to fall strategically. When I left the precinct, the city felt sharper somehow, the air colder, the noise heavier. Boston in late winter doesn't forgive weakness. It magnifies it. By the following week, Natalie had blocked my number. Texts came back undelivered, emails unread. I tried once. A handwritten letter, left at her building's concierge. It was returned the next morning, sealed again, with no recipient scrawled in blue ink. Patrick's firm had gone silent too. My name scrubbed from client lists, voicemails rerouted to reception. Every trace of me, professionally, financially, erased with surgical precision. Bills started arriving. Taxes, property maintenance, medical premiums I hadn't noticed when life was stable. I sold jewelry first. Quiet transactions in a Back Bay consignment store, the kind where the clerk doesn't ask questions. Watching my wedding ring disappear across the glass counter felt like losing the last proof of who I used to be. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table again. No wine, no distractions. Just the silence and the small, cruel sound of the refrigerator motor kicking on and off. Sam called around 10. I checked the wire trails again. They knew exactly how to vanish the funds. Offshore, shell corporations, the whole playbook. I let out a long breath. They think I'm beaten. He hesitated. Aren't you? I looked toward the window. The snow from last week had melted, leaving streaks of dirt and water on the glass. Then let's act like it. He exhaled, caught the change in my tone. What are you thinking? Something they'd never expect from me. The next morning, I opened the cedar chest in my father's old study. It smelled faintly of tobacco and dust. a scent I hadn't allowed myself to remember in years. Inside were ledgers, file folders, photographs of his firm back in the 1950s, men in wool suits and women typing at clunky gray machines. I wasn't looking for money then, just a reason not to feel stupid. But grief has a strange way of handing you clues disguised as comfort. Beneath an old framed photo, my father shaking hands with a banker, lay a stack of papers tied with string. Receipts, bank letters, a few of my mother's notes, and at the very bottom, an envelope yellowed with time. 1960. Confidential account. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father's, heavy, deliberate strokes, like he was carving permanence into paper. My pulse kicked. I set it on the desk and just stared at it, half afraid to open it, half desperate to know what was inside. Sam's words echoed in my head. They knew exactly where to hit. Maybe it was time I remembered where I came from. The furnace clicked off, leaving the house in complete stillness. I ran my thumb under the envelope's seal, the sound of tearing paper as loud as thunder. Inside, the faint scent of cedar again, and something else, ink and history. There were numbers, names, a bank seal stamped in blue. I didn't understand all of it yet, but one phrase stood out. Perpetual Trust, First Federal Bank of Boston, established 1960. My breath caught. Maybe the past wasn't done with me after all. The morning light hit the papers like they'd been waiting for it. Pale blue ink glowing faintly against yellowed pages. My father's handwriting looked alive, steady and confident. Every letter drawn like it mattered. A ledger, a series of numbers, and beneath them, a seal. First Federal Bank of Boston. The page trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear, from recognition. That seal used to sit on envelopes that arrived at our house when I was a child. I'd watch my father open them after dinner, his expression unreadable, then lock them away in the same cedar chest I had just opened. I called Sam. He arrived 20 minutes later, half awake, clutching a coffee and his laptop bag. "What's this about?" I slid the papers across the table. He leaned in, adjusting his glasses. Ledger entries, First Federal Seal, and an account number. He paused, reading closer. Eleanor, this could still exist. I frowned. After 60 years? He shrugged. Banks merge, rebrand, get acquired, but dormant accounts sometimes carry over, especially trusts. If the account was perpetual, like it says here, the funds could have compounded. I stared at him. You think there's actually money left? I think there's a reason your father kept it secret. His words hung between us, heavy and promising. We spent the rest of the day combing through online archives. The original First Federal had been absorbed into New England Trust in the late 80s, which then merged with Boston Mutual. Half the records were digitized. The rest lived in basements and storage vaults, the kind only retirees and archivists remembered. Sam found a name buried in an old PDF scan of a 1992 merger notice, Marion Fisher, Senior Accounts Manager. She handled special trusts, he said, tapping the screen. Still alive, apparently. Retired up in Maine. Maine? He smiled faintly. You up for a drive? The next morning, I packed a single overnight bag. The highway north cut through bare trees and gray sky. Sam drove. I stared out the window, the city shrinking behind us. Every few miles, I caught myself thinking about Natalie, wondering if she'd even notice I was gone. We reached a quiet coastal town by dusk. The GPS led us to a small white house overlooking the water. Shingles weathered, an American flag faded by salt wind. An elderly woman answered the door. Her silver hair was cut short, her cardigan buttoned perfectly. Mrs. Fisher? I asked. That depends who's asking, she said, cautious but curious. I introduced myself and explained briefly who my father was. Something flickered across her face, recognition wrapped in nostalgia. She motioned for us to come inside. Her home smelled like lavender and old wood. The living room was neat. Books lined the walls, a framed photo of a young banker in the 1960s smiling beside a bronze plaque, First Federal Trust Division. I remember him, she said, settling into an armchair. Thomas Grant, sharp man. Quiet, but he understood how banks really worked, not just what they told people. I leaned forward. Do you remember his accounts? She chuckled softly. I remember most of the ones that still haunt the archives. She took the ledger from me, her hand surprisingly steady. This handwriting, she murmured. Yes. I processed the paperwork myself. He opened something unusual, a perpetual trust. Before the FDIC changed its inheritance structure in '61. Sam blinked. Meaning? It means it can't legally expire. Unless the beneficiary withdraws, the interest just keeps growing. I felt my chest tighten. He never told me. Marion's eyes softened. He probably planned for your future, or your test. The word test lingered in the air like smoke. I sat back slowly, the old grief mixing with something sharper. Purpose. Either way, I said quietly. He passed it to me. Marion rose and walked to a small safe tucked behind a bookshelf. From it, she pulled a weathered folder marked with the same blue bank seal. I kept a copy of dormant trust references. This was too rare to discard. Inside were details, numbers, signatures, routing codes. Proof that the account existed. I reached for it, but she held it a moment longer. Be careful, Eleanor. Money like this carries ghosts. Some people kill to protect what others forgot. Outside, the ocean wind howled against the windows. Sam glanced at me. What now? I folded the papers carefully back into the envelope. Now, I said, we see if history can still pay its debts. The last light of the day broke across Marion's window, scattering through the room in fractured gold. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt something close to control. Fragile, bright, and dangerous. The next morning smelled of salt and old paper. Marion insisted we meet her downtown, at a decommissioned branch of what used to be First Federal. The sign above the door still bore the faded logo, a brass key within a shield, half polished by decades of sea wind. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with dust and time. Rows of wooden filing cabinets stretched toward a concrete wall, each drawer labeled in gold paint that had long since dulled to brown. Marion's footsteps echoed as she led us through. I shouldn't even have access, she murmured, fishing a ring of keys from her cardigan pocket. But the bank never changed the locks after the merger. No one thought these records mattered. The lock clicked open with a sound that felt like the start of something irreversible. We followed her down a narrow corridor until we reached a heavy steel door, its surface scarred by rust. Marion turned the handle with surprising strength, and the smell hit first. Paper, ink, and the faint tang of metal. This is the vault archive, she said. Everything pre-1970 that wasn't digitized stayed here. Sam's voice dropped to a reverent whisper. It's like a mausoleum for money. Marion smiled faintly. Not money, memory. She shuffled through drawers with the precision of someone who still believed in order. Finally, she stopped at one marked Grant, Thomas, Special Holdings. Her hand lingered on it before pulling it open. Inside were folders thick with yellowing paper. She lifted one, spread it open on a nearby table, and pointed to a ledger page filled with meticulous handwriting. There, she said, tapping the column with her index finger. Account Tamar F. 60721. Established 1960. Initial deposit $480,000. I felt the breath leave me. That was more than my father's entire net worth back then. Sam leaned closer. Wait, he said, already scribbling on his tablet. Adjusted for inflation and compound interest. He paused, running numbers. His eyes widened. That's over $7 million today. For a long moment, no one spoke. Dust floated through a shaft of light from a broken window, swirling between us like suspended time. I pressed my hand against the table to steady myself. 7 million, I repeated softly, almost exactly what they took. Marion closed the ledger. Your father knew value differently. He didn't save for retirement. He built insurance against betrayal. The words landed heavy, as if she'd plucked them from the thought I hadn't dared to speak aloud. Sam looked at me carefully. Equal to what they stole, he said. I met his eyes. Then this isn't luck, it's balance. We spent the next hour copying reference numbers, scanning signatures, and verifying the trust's legal status. The records showed no closure, no claim, no beneficiary withdrawals in 65 years. My name appeared once. Successor. Contingent. He really did mean for you to find it, Marion said. I swallowed hard, the emotion raw but strangely clean. He always believed in timing. Marion retrieved a small brass key from a drawer and pressed it into my palm. The physical account can be reactivated through Boston Mutual's Heritage Division. Quietly, if you know the right channels. I still have a few friends. The metal was cold, heavier than it looked. I closed my hand around it. I'll be careful. Her eyes sharpened. Careful doesn't mean passive, just discreet. Outside, the sun was already sinking. The main air cut clean and cold across my face as we stepped into the parking lot. Sam didn't start the car right away. He just sat there, the ledger copy resting on his lap, both of us listening to the wind batter the old sign above the bank door. Finally, he said, You know, this could change everything. It already has, I answered. He nodded slowly, then started the engine. What's the next move? I turned the brass key in my hand, watching the light glint off its worn surface. I reopen the account, I said, quietly. Then I wait for the right moment to let them see what balance really looks like. The road ahead curved along the coastline, endless gray stretching to the horizon. For the first time in months, the silence between us wasn't despair. It was strategy. As the car disappeared down the narrow main road, the brass key caught the last flash of sunset, glowing briefly like a promise being renewed. Boston in early spring feels like it's always deciding between thaw and frost. That uncertainty suited me fine. I'd become comfortable living in the gray. Sam and I returned from Maine with the ledger, the brass key, and something harder to measure: momentum. Within 48 hours, the dormant account had been discreetly reactivated through a Heritage Trust review at Boston Mutual. The bank executive handling it never met me. Everything was done through encrypted correspondence and a borrowed name, E.G. Holdings, LLC. When the confirmation came through, trust restored. Active balance, $723,406.32. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the numbers. The same amount Patrick and Natalie had taken from me, almost to the dollar. My hands trembled, but not from shock, from symmetry. This is poetic, Sam murmured, reading over my shoulder. No, I said quietly. It's accounting. 3 days later, the financial newswires started buzzing. A private entity, anonymous, Boston-based, had acquired a 12% stake in Cole and Partners LLP, Patrick's firm. The move was small enough to avoid headlines, large enough to disrupt ownership control. I was careful. The purchase came through layers of shell companies routed through Delaware, then quietly folded under the umbrella of EG Holdings. On paper, I was no one. In reality, I was sitting in my living room watching Patrick's world tilt without understanding why. Sam texted me a screenshot of the market notice. Cole and Partners welcomes strategic investment. He wrote, "They think it's an expansion fund. Genius." I smiled, sipping coffee that suddenly tasted like victory. Let's keep it that way. 2 mornings later, Patrick's partner, a man named Weller, stood in his glass office overlooking the harbor, holding a report. "Who the hell is EG Holdings?" he asked, tossing it on Patrick's desk. Patrick leaned back, pretending indifference. "Probably another equity firm fishing for control. Except they've already filed a motion to appoint an observer to our internal audit committee." That got his attention. He frowned, flipping through the papers. "Observer? How did they—" Weller jabbed a finger at the initials on the header. "EG Holdings. Ring any bells?" For the briefest moment, something flickered across Patrick's face, a shadow of recognition he quickly masked. Coincidence. But it wasn't. He knew. That evening, I received the email confirmation. EG Holdings appointed audit observer. Meeting set for Friday. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, calm and deliberate. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who'd been humiliated and erased. She was colder now, sharper. Friday morning, I arrived at the Cole and Partners Tower dressed in the neutral armor of a seasoned consultant, gray suit, silk scarf, hairpin tight. The receptionist glanced at the appointment list and smiled politely. "Eleanor Grant, representing EG Holdings?" "Yes," I said. "We're family investors." Inside the conference room, Patrick froze when I walked in. Weller looked between us, confused. "Mrs. Grant?" Weller said slowly. "You're with the new stakeholders?" Patrick's jaw tightened. "Apparently." I set my folder on the table, my voice steady. "Cole and Partners has been an integral part of my family's financial history. It felt appropriate to reinvest." Patrick's eyes narrowed. "Reinvest," he repeated. "Legacy money," I added smoothly. You, of all people, should appreciate the irony. Weller, oblivious to the current undercurrents, offered a forced chuckle. "Well, welcome aboard, Mrs. Grant. We're always happy to see former clients return in a professional capacity." Patrick said nothing. When the meeting ended, I waited until the room cleared, then turned to him. "You always said business was about control," I said softly. "Seems I've learned." His smile was brittle. "You're vindictive." "No," I said, gathering my folder. "Accountable." He watched me leave, eyes calculating, but underneath the surface, panic. That evening, Natalie called. It was the first time I'd heard her voice in months. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Patrick's furious. You bought into his firm?" I let silence stretch. "I decided to reinvest in family." "That's not reinvestment," she snapped. "That's revenge." "Call it what you like," I said. "I call it restitution." There was a tremor in her breath, something between anger and fear. "You won't win, Mom. He's smarter than you think." "Then I'll just have to remind him where I got my intelligence." I hung up before she could respond. Outside, Boston's skyline shimmered against the Charles River. A reflection divided perfectly down the middle. Light and shadow. Balance. And somewhere inside that reflection, I saw my father's steady handwriting again, perpetual trust. A promise that had waited 60 years to come due. Patrick had always been good at pretending control. The man could bluff through a deposition with a smile, lie under oath without blinking, charm auditors into believing they were the ones wasting his time. But paranoia has a scent. Faint at first, then unmistakable. By the second week after my reinvestment, he was already unraveling. News had trickled through his firm, files suddenly under internal review, small irregularities surfacing in trust account reports. The new Investors Observer quietly requesting detailed ledgers. Patrick started staying late at the office, lights burning long after midnight. Phone calls made in hushed tones. Meanwhile, Natalie played her part online, oblivious or pretending to be. Her social media shimmered with curated excess, champagne on marble counters, weekend trips to Nantucket, a Cartier bracelet tagged with Hanscher New Chapter. The irony was perfect. Her credit lines had all been quietly rerouted under EG Holdings' oversight clause. Every purchase she flaunted ran through a system I now controlled. Sam called one morning, voice tinged with disbelief. "You realize her Amex points are technically yours now?" "I'm not interested in points," I said. "I'm interested in pressure." He laughed, a low, wary sound. "You're cornering them legally." "Emotionally, too," I replied. "Guilt is expensive. Let's see how long she can afford it." It was a Thursday when the next domino leaned. I'd bought the mortgage note on Natalie and Patrick's waterfront condo through a real estate trust. The broker never asked questions. Money smooths every conversation in this city. When the deed confirmation came through, I stared at the document, my daughter's address now technically under my ownership. Sam's text popped up. "You realize this is chess, not war, right?" I typed back. "Sometimes they're the same game." Detective Claire Whitman called later that afternoon. Her voice was brisk, efficient. The tone of someone who never fully leaves work, even off duty. "I've been looking into Patrick Cole's filings," she said. "Some of his client escrow transfers don't add up. Forgeries layered under legitimate contracts. Classic laundering pattern." "Do you have enough to move?" "Not yet. But your re-entry into his firm stirred dust I couldn't before. Internal audits open doors subpoenas can't." I smiled faintly. "Glad to help." "You knew what you were doing when you bought in?" she said. Not a question, an observation. "I learned from the best," I said. "Your father?" "No, my daughter and her lawyer." There was silence, then the faint sound of her pen tapping the desk. "Careful, Eleanor. You're winning a different kind of game now. One that doesn't end cleanly." "I'm not looking for clean," I said. "Just fair." That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window overlooking Beacon Hill. Snow had melted into black puddles on the street below, reflecting the city lights like broken glass. My phone buzzed with a notification. Natalie, again, posting a photo. She looked radiant, her hand resting on Patrick's chest, the caption reading, "Trust is everything." The word hit me like a pulse of heat. Trust. My father's word. The word they'd desecrated. I opened my laptop, logged into the holding dashboard, and stared at the condo mortgage file. One click would send a payment overdue notice. Subtle, bureaucratic, terrifyingly effective. Instead, I hesitated. I wanted her to see it coming. "Timing," I whispered, echoing my father's voice in my head. Always timing. Across town, in that same condo, Patrick was pacing the living room, tie undone, scotch sweating in his hand. "Something's off," he muttered. "Someone's watching the accounts." Natalie looked up from her phone, unimpressed. You're being paranoid. I'm being practical. There's a pattern. Documents we didn't file, requests we didn't make. Maybe the firm's just cleaning up the audit. He turned sharply, his tone dark. You don't understand. Someone's inside. When his phone rang, he nearly dropped it. The number was blocked. He answered. Mr. Cole, came Detective Whitman's measured voice. I'd like to discuss your escrow authorizations from 2022 in person. He swallowed hard. Am I under investigation? Not yet, she said. But you will be if you hang up. The color drained from his face. Natalie watched, unease replacing her defiance. What was that? She asked when he ended the call. Patrick stared at her, and for the first time, she saw fear. Your mother, he said quietly. She's not playing defense anymore. I closed my laptop and leaned back, exhaling slowly. The first domino had tipped. Outside, the wind rose off the river, rattling the windows like applause. And somewhere beneath that sound, I could almost hear my father's voice again, steady, certain, unyielding. Balance restored, Ellie. Keep it steady. Boston was in that brief spring thaw where everything smelled like rain and gasoline. The streets were slick with last night's drizzle, shop windows fogged with the first hint of warmth. I'd chosen the restaurant carefully, quiet, discreet. The kind of place where powerful people pretended to reconcile over linen napkins and silent resentments. I reserved a corner table by the window, the same seat I used to take her to for birthday lunches when she was little. Back then, she'd order lobster rolls and talk about law school, eyes bright with ambition I'd once mistaken for integrity. When the hostess led her in, I saw the change immediately. Natalie's confidence had acquired edges, expensive, defensive ones. She wore a black blazer sharp enough to wound, her phone clutched like a shield. Mom. The word was both greeting and accusation. I gestured to the chair across from me. No lawyers, just us. She hesitated, then sat. You think this is going to fix anything? I didn't invite you to fix anything. I invited you to eat. The waiter arrived, nervous energy in tow. I ordered tea. She asked for sparkling water. As soon as he left, she leaned forward. Patrick says you're trying to tank his firm. Patrick says a lot of things. You're interfering with our lives. I smiled faintly. Sweetheart, I am your life. You just forgot that. Her jaw tightened. You had your turn. I'm not your little girl anymore. No, I said. You're a woman with a man who sees you as leverage. She scoffed, but it sounded thin. He loves me. I let silence do the heavy lifting, then said quietly, Patrick will leave you the moment he runs out of my money. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. You don't know him. I know his type, I said, and I know his accounts. Something flickered in her eyes. Fear or curiosity, I couldn't tell. She tried to cover it with contempt. You think you can scare me with your spreadsheets and ghost companies? I reached into my bag and placed an envelope on the table. No, but maybe he can. She stared at it. What's that? Proof. When she didn't move, I slid it toward her. Inside was a single printed photograph. Patrick at a marina, shaking hands with a man whose face she didn't recognize, but whose name she would. The caption beneath, a corporate registration header, Cole Maritime Holdings, Cayman account THA Fosra 72. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled it out. Where did you get this? Public filings. Eventually. She looked up sharply. No, this is private. Offshore. I didn't answer. I just sipped my tea. Who gave you this? She demanded, voice dropping. Patrick doesn't even. Grandpa did. She blinked, momentarily thrown. What? My father, I said, keeping my tone level. He built a trust 60 years ago to protect what mattered. Turns out he was still protecting us, even from ourselves. For a second, her mask cracked. Confusion chasing guilt. Guilt morphing into something smaller, almost childlike. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, Natalie. You of all people should remember that. She sat back, crossing her arms. So what? You're going to expose him? Destroy my life to make a point? I'm not destroying anything, I said. I'm restoring the balance you tipped. She stared at me, searching for mercy and finding only truth. You've changed, she whispered. I smiled without warmth. I had to. You taught me how. The waiter returned with our plates, unaware he'd walked into a war zone disguised as lunch. Natalie pushed her salad away untouched. This isn't over, she said. It never is, I replied. She stood abruptly, chair scraping the tile. If you come near Patrick again, I interrupted softly. He's already closer to me than you think. Her expression faltered. She didn't understand yet, not fully, how deep my reinvestment went. But she would. She left in a storm of perfume and wounded pride, the door closing behind her like a verdict. I sat there for a long moment, the tea cooling, the rain starting again outside. The envelope lay open on the table, the photo catching a streak of light before I slipped it back into my bag. When the waiter approached timidly to ask if I needed anything else, I said, "Just the check." As he walked away, my phone buzzed. A message from Sam. Whitman found something. Call ASAP. I smiled, feeling that familiar shift, the next domino tipping. The message from Sam still glowed on my phone when the first hit landed. By morning, my checking account was frozen, pending verification. My small consulting income, what little remained outside EG Holdings, was locked in a compliance review. The bank clerk on the line sounded apologetic but immovable. I'm sorry, Mrs. Grant, but there's been a legal notice filed by Cole and Partners. It alleges a conflict of fiduciary interest. A retaliation, swift, precise, and predictably arrogant. I smiled as I hung up. Patrick's counterpunch had arrived right on schedule. By noon, an email followed, an official statement from his firm threatening a defamation suit. They accused me of malicious interference with private business relations, a phrase Patrick himself had once used against a rival. It would have been laughable if the signatures didn't make my stomach twist. Natalie's name was among them. It wasn't enough that she'd betrayed me. Now she was co-signing my character assassination. I dialed Detective Whitman. She answered before the second ring. I was expecting your call, she said. Time to file the official complaint. Her chair creaked on the other end. You're certain? Once it's public, it doesn't go away. I'm done playing defense, I said. Let the record speak for itself. Understood. She paused. Funny timing, you might not need much. His firm just launched an internal audit, anonymous tip about financial irregularities. I allowed myself a slow breath. Anonymous, I repeated. She chuckled. You do good work, Mrs. Grant. By Friday, the story began to leak. A finance blog ran a blind item about a Boston law firm under scrutiny for offshore irregularities. Within hours, the whispers reached Patrick's own offices. Clients started calling. Partners grew restless. Every attorney there could smell blood. And lawyers can smell it better than sharks. Natalie, however, was unraveling faster than him. She showed up at the firm in tears, demanding to know why she'd been served a subpoena that morning. The receptionist had whispered it around the floor before noon. Sam sent me a screenshot of a legal notice. Natalie Grant, material witness. He called moments later, barely containing his disbelief. You've made them fight each other. I looked out the window of my brownstone, the city moving slow below me, spring drizzle soft against the glass. Division, I said softly, is cheaper than revenge. He laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from admiration mixed with fear. Remind me never to owe you money. That night, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for decades. I didn't pour it in celebration, but as acknowledgement, a ritual for the living who have learned the cost of winning. Then the phone rang again. It wasn't Sam or Whitman. It was a Maine area code. Mrs. Grant? The voice on the line was unfamiliar. This is St. Agnes Hospital in Portland. We have a patient listed as your emergency contact, Marion Fisher. She suffered a stroke this evening. She's critical. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering across the tile. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Marion, who had given me the key, the history, the truth. The one person who still carried fragments of my father's secret. Is she awake? I managed. No, ma'am, but if your family... I am, I said, already grabbing my coat. I'll be there tonight. The drive north blurred. Rain turned to mist, mist to fog. My headlights carved through darkness like truth through denial. Narrow, necessary, unforgiving. When I reached the hospital, the halls smelled of antiseptic and loss. Machines hummed like mechanical prayers. A nurse guided me to her room. Marion lay still, her face pale against the white sheets. Tubes, monitors, the soft beep of persistence. I took her hand gently. You weren't supposed to leave yet, I whispered. We're not finished. Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. On the bedside table sat a folder, the kind she always carried, bank insignia faint but visible beneath the light. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of the trust papers, annotated in her delicate handwriting, and at the bottom, a note written in unsteady ink. If I don't make it, the next key is with Sam. My heart clenched. She had known. Outside her window, the wind off the Atlantic wailed against the glass, steady and mournful. I looked down at her frail hand, then at the folder. You passed it to me, I said softly, echoing my own words from weeks ago. And I won't let it die here. The monitors beeped in rhythm with my pulse, slow, steady, unyielding. Somewhere in Boston, Patrick Cole thought he'd regained control. He hadn't realized yet that when one domino falls, another always waits its turn. The next morning broke gray and slow, the kind of light that never fully wakes the world. I hadn't slept. Marion's machines had kept time all night, every steady beep a reminder of borrowed minutes. When the nurse came in, she looked at me with the quiet sympathy of someone who's seen too many vigil nights. She's scheduled for surgery in an hour. The clot's severe. The doctor says if there's anything you want to say. I nodded, standing. My throat felt raw. Marion's hand was cold but firm in mine. You old fox, I whispered, still running my father's game long after he's gone. Her eyes opened just enough for me to see a flicker of awareness. She tried to speak. I leaned closer. Don't waste your breath, I murmured. You've done enough. But she shook her head slightly, struggling. Her hand moved toward the bedside table where the folder still sat. Her fingers brushed it, then gestured weakly to the drawer beneath. I opened it. Inside was a small sealed envelope, aged, brittle, its edges yellowed. Across the front, in faded fountain pen ink, 3 words in my father's handwriting, for Eleanor only. I looked back at Marion. She exhaled a shallow breath that might have been a smile. Before surgery, I said softly. You make sure the right things are found, don't you? She blinked once, slowly, deliberately. The nurse appeared at the door, ready to wheel her to pre-op. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, my pulse unsteady. As they took her away, I whispered, "Thank you." In the hospital cafeteria, the smell of burnt coffee hung like grief. I sat in a corner booth, envelope trembling in my hand. I'd seen my father's writing only once since his death, on a birthday card he'd mailed when I was 20. He had signed it with his full name, Thomas J. Grant, as if emotion required formality. Now, holding this letter, my chest tightened with that same old ache, admiration and distance intertwined. I broke the seal carefully. The paper inside was thin, onion skin stock, the kind used in typewriters. The words, though faded, were unmistakably his. Eleanor, if you are reading this, then time has already played its cruelest trick. Use this only if your own blood betrays you. The account I built in 1960 is more than money. It is a safeguard against corruption, even within our family. I hope you never need it. But if you do, know this: justice rarely arrives wearing a badge. Sometimes it needs a ledger. My vision blurred. I had spent my life believing I was the first to see betrayal coming, when all along he had seen it decades before me. At the bottom of the page, a line in his neat, disciplined hand. The enclosed key opens the safety deposit box where the original trust agreement is held. That paper is your shield and your weapon. Protect it, and it will protect you. I pressed the letter to my chest, the paper softening against my tears. You foresaw everything, I whispered. Inside the envelope's fold was a small, tarnished key tagged First Federal, Box 3124. 2 hours later, Marion was in surgery. I drove straight to the Heritage Branch downtown, the same building where the trust had been born. The marble floor gleamed with the kind of reverence banks reserve for their own history. When I presented the key, the clerk, a man too young to understand what he was unlocking, led me into a narrow vault room. The box was heavy, its brass front stamped with numbers that had probably never been touched since Kennedy was in office. Inside lay the original trust agreement, intact and notarized. My father's name, my own, and a clause that stunned me. Successor rights transfer upon provable betrayal by direct descendant. He had written the conditions himself. My father had left me legal authority not only over his trust, but over anything derived from it, including E.G. Holdings, the weapon, and the shield. I walked out of that vault with the document sealed in my coat and drove straight to Boston Mutual's legal division. Within a day, the papers were authenticated and registered under my name. By Monday morning, Patrick's firm was chaos. Partners resigning, clients demanding answers, media leaks spreading faster than containment could manage. E.G. Holdings, the company he'd mocked as a ghost investor, now legally owned the controlling interest in his firm's liquid capital accounts. He'd built his empire on forged trust. I had replaced it with a real one. When Sam called, his voice was breathless. "Eleanor, what did you do?" "Exactly what my father told me," I said quietly. "He left me the weapon and the shield." Through the window, the city lights fractured across the Charles like shards of history refracted into justice. And somewhere between the static and Sam's stunned silence, I could already hear the headlines forming. Patrick Cole wasn't just losing, he was about to disappear. The sound of downfall is quiet when it begins. It doesn't roar. It rustles, papers, whispers, the slow crack of a reputation turning to dust. By the time Boston woke that Monday, Patrick Cole's empire had already been gutted from the inside out. Federal investigators arrived at his glass tower before sunrise. Employees were ushered into conference rooms, phones confiscated, computers sealed. By noon, his accounts were frozen. Offshore assets, traced through Cayman, Zurich, and Panama, seized under suspicion of fraud and money laundering. The evening news led with it. Prominent attorney under investigation for financial crimes. The headline beneath was worse. Lawyer couple accused of misusing client trusts. Patrick's smirk, once his trademark, had vanished from every firm photo on their website within hours. Natalie's was harder to erase. Her name appeared beside his in every report, every headline, every echo chamber of public scorn. I watched it unfold from my kitchen, the TV volume low. Not satisfaction, just inevitability. When Sam came by, he didn't knock, just let himself in. "You've officially become the ghost in their story," he said, setting a bag of takeout on the counter. "Every channel's running it." "Let them," I said quietly. "People need someone to blame." He hesitated. "You don't sound happy?" I glanced at him. Happiness isn't part of the equation. Closure is. By the second day, reporters had camped outside the Cole & Partners building. Cameras caught Natalie leaving through a side door, head down, oversized sunglasses doing little to hide the panic in her eyes. A microphone nearly hit her cheek as someone shouted, "Did your mother fund the fraud?" She didn't answer, but I saw the footage later. The way she flinched at the word mother, like it stung. Public humiliation had replaced her curated perfection. Her online accounts went silent. The once persistent rhythm of her life, appearances, parties, status, flattened into static. Meanwhile, Patrick's bail hearing played on every channel. He stood beside his attorney, jaw tight, arrogance flickering under exhaustion. When the prosecutor read the charges, his gaze broke for the first time. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. When the noise became too loud, I left the city. I drove north. No plan, no calls, just the steady hum of asphalt and distance. My father's old house sat just outside Concord, tucked between bare oaks and stone walls that had outlasted generations. I hadn't been there since his funeral. The porch boards still creaked the same way they did when I was a child. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. His old study looked untouched, papers still stacked neatly, the smell of tobacco faint in the wood grain. I ran my hand across his desk and let the silence wrap around me like a heavy blanket. I wasn't hiding. I was remembering what endurance felt like. Detective Claire Whitman arrived 2 days later. No badge flashing, no clipboard. Just 2 coffees in a cardboard tray. "You're hard to find," she said, handing me one. "Not hard enough," I murmured. She sat across from me, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. "You won quietly. No arrests, no spectacle. But make no mistake, Patrick's done." His partners turned on him the second the trust documents surfaced. "You left him no ground to stand on." I stared into the flames. "No one wins against family, Detective. We just survive better." She nodded slowly. "Survival looks good on you." When she left, the quiet returned, so complete it almost rang in my ears. Sam arrived that evening, shoulders hunched against the cold. He looked around the old study, nostalgia softening his usual sharpness. "You finally stopped running." "I came home," I said. "There's a difference." He leaned against the doorway. "So what now?" "You've leveled them. The firm's gone. Patrick's finished. Your daughter, well, she's got a long road ahead. Are you done?" I stared at the desk, at the framed photo of my father behind it. his young face confident, certain. "No," I said quietly. "Not until she understands." Sam frowned. "Understands what?" "That this wasn't revenge," I said. "It was inheritance." Outside, the wind pressed against the old windows, whispering through the cracks like the echo of a lesson still unfinished. I didn't know if I was ready to face Natalie again, but I knew I would. Because some debts aren't measured in dollars. They're measured in understanding. And hers was long overdue. The knock came just past midnight. Not urgent, not timid. Somewhere in between, the rhythm of someone who wasn't sure they were welcome. I already knew who it was. The night outside was heavy with fog, the kind that blurs boundaries, road from field, past from present. I opened the door to find Natalie standing there, soaked through, mascara streaked, eyes wild. "Mom," she breathed. "You destroyed me." I stepped aside. "You'd better come in." She hesitated, then crossed the threshold, arms wrapped tight around herself. The heat from the old fireplace filled the silence as she stood dripping on the rug like a ghost that hadn't decided whether it belonged among the living. "I lost everything," she said, voice trembling. "My accounts, my apartment, my job. Do you know what it's like to watch people cross the street to avoid you?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I do." Her eyes snapped to mine, accusation sharp. "You did this. You and your damn legacy games." I studied her. This woman who was once the little girl I taught to balance a checkbook and to tell the truth even when it hurt. "No, Natalie," I said softly, "you destroyed your inheritance." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I was tired of your control." The fire popped, punctuating her words. "I never wanted control," I said. "Only character." Her breath hitched. That's rich. Coming from someone who just dismantled my life for sport. Sport? My voice cracked, not from anger but disbelief. "I spent my life building something for you, and you handed it to a man who saw you as a conduit. You didn't just lose money, Natalie. You gave away your integrity." Tears welled in her eyes. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't replay it every night? The things I signed? The lies I told?" She shook her head. "I was drowning, Mom. He told me you'd cut me off, that I was never going to be enough for you." I closed my eyes, the words landing like stones. "And you believed him." I wanted to believe someone. We stood there, the distance between us suddenly vast, not measured in feet, but in years of silence and misunderstandings we both mistook for independence. She looked around the study, her gaze landing on the old photograph of my father. "Everything I did, I thought it was just business," she said. "I didn't realize it was blood." "Business is always blood," I said. Her shoulders collapsed, the fight draining out of her. "He's gone," she whispered. "Patrick. He left. The second the investigators froze the accounts, he disappeared. No goodbye, no message." The room felt smaller, the air thicker. For all the damage she'd done, for all the walls I'd built, she was still my child, trembling, broken, hollowed out by betrayal. She dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. "I didn't mean for it to end like this." I knelt beside her, the old floorboards groaning beneath our weight. For a long moment I didn't touch her. I just watched her crumble under the truth she'd refused to face. Then instinct overrode pride. I reached out and pulled her close. Her body shook against mine, the scent of rain and regret thick in her hair. "I wanted to make you proud," she whispered. "You did," I said softly. "Just not like this." She clung to me harder. "Can you forgive me?" I wanted to answer yes, to free both of us from the years of anger and silence. But forgiveness isn't a word. It's a wound that has to close slowly, on its own time. I don't know, I said finally, but I want to try. We stayed like that, mother and daughter, grief and guilt braided together, until the fire dimmed to embers. When she finally stood, she wiped her face and looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen since she was a child, searching, open, terrified. "What happens now?" she asked. I looked toward the window where dawn was just beginning to bleed into the horizon. "Now," I said, "we start telling the truth." Her lips trembled. "About everything?" "Especially about everything." The wind outside shifted, carrying the first hint of morning through the old house. It felt like a beginning pretending to be an ending. Fragile, uncertain, but real. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone in it. 3 weeks after the night Natalie came to me, the phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. Patrick Cole. His voice was hoarse, stripped of the confidence that used to drip from every word. "Eleanor," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "We need to talk." I almost hung up, but curiosity, or maybe closure, stopped me. "About what?" He hesitated, then exhaled. "A settlement. I can't survive another trial. Not financially. Not publicly. I'm prepared to return what I can. Sign whatever releases you want. Just drop the complaint." There it was. The sound of a man bargaining for air. "You're not doing this for me," I said. "No," he admitted. "I'm doing it because I've lost everything else." I thought of Natalie, the trembling girl who'd once called him her future. She'd been staying with me these past weeks, quiet, haunted, trying to rebuild some version of herself among the ruins. Part of me wanted him to rot in the same silence he'd left her in, but another part, the older, tired part, wanted the noise to end. "Send it through your attorney," I said. When I hung up, Sam was already standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "That was him, wasn't it?" I nodded. He sighed. "If you take that deal, you'll undo everything we built. The investigation, the press coverage, all of it disappears into paperwork." He walks. "I don't care about punishment anymore," I said. "I care about peace." He stepped closer. "Peace for who?" I didn't answer. The meeting took place at a neutral law office downtown. Gray walls, gray carpet, gray morality. Patrick looked smaller in person, his tailored suit hanging loose, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He didn't offer to shake my hand. Good. I wouldn't have taken it. His lawyer spoke first, reading through the terms. Full restitution of my lost assets, non-disclosure clauses, mutual withdrawal of civil and criminal complaints. All legal, all cold. Then Patrick leaned forward. "You win, Eleanor. You always did. I just want to be done." I studied him. "And Natalie?" He blinked. "What about her?" "You'll make a public statement," I said. "You'll clear her name. You'll say she had no knowledge of your fraud." He shook his head. "That's not true." "Neither were half your filings," I said evenly. "Do it anyway." He hesitated, eyes darting to his lawyer, who nodded reluctantly. "Fine. I'll draft something." "No," I said. "You'll stand in front of cameras and say it yourself." His mouth tightened. "You really can't help but control every outcome, can you?" I leaned back. "No, Patrick. I just prefer my justice televised." After an hour of signatures and silence, the papers lay before me. The final page, the one that would end it all, waited for my name. Sam's warning echoed in my head. It could undo your victory. But victories are temporary things. Peace, however fragile, lasts longer. I picked up the pen. I have one condition, I said. When you clear her name, you mean it. No backhanded remarks, no insinuations. You will give her back her dignity. Patrick looked at me across the table, something like shame flickering in his eyes. Agreed. I signed. He followed. Just like that, the war ended not with thunder, but with ink. Outside the office, Detective Whitman was waiting by her car, arms folded. Word travels fast, she said. You dropped the complaint. I did. She tilted her head. You realize that means he gets to keep part of his money and maybe his license. I know. She studied me. Why? After everything? I met her gaze. Because I didn't want him to owe me fear anymore. Her expression softened. You still played him? I smiled faintly. No, I just changed currencies. The late afternoon sun caught the glass towers around us, turning them gold for an instant before the light shifted again. As I walked away, I realized it wasn't victory that felt heavy in my chest. It was release. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of someone else's betrayal pressing on my lungs. But somewhere in that same city, cameras were already setting up, press releases drafted, headlines cued. And soon, Patrick Cole would stand in front of the world and say her name the way I always meant it to be heard. Clean. 6 months later, Boston looked different. Or maybe I did. The skyline hadn't changed, but the way I watched it had. I no longer saw towers as monuments to ambition. I saw them as ledgers. Every pane of glass reflecting both debt and redemption. The morning paper confirmed what I'd been planning quietly for months. Grant Family Fund's ethics, scholarship for women in law. Below the headline was a photo. Natalie, standing behind a lectern at Harvard Law, poised and careful. Her expression wasn't the brittle confidence of the woman who once flaunted luxury. It was steadier, humbled. The article beneath explained what most readers would miss. The scholarship wasn't a publicity stunt. It was the core condition written into my revised trust. Natalie had no access to inheritance unless she directed the foundation herself for 10 consecutive years, unpaid. Discipline through service, not wealth. I'd built it that way deliberately. My father would have called it poetic symmetry. Sam and I watched the televised ceremony from my living room. He had brought bagels and a knowing grin. She cleans up well, he said, nodding toward the screen. She always did, I replied. Natalie stood beneath a crimson banner reading Integrity in Practice, the Grant Fellowship. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear but fragile, a tone I recognized from my own early speeches, before I'd learned how power hardens the throat. My mother taught me that money without ethics is just leverage, she said. This foundation exists to remind us that the law is only as good as the people brave enough to uphold it. Sam let out a low whistle. She's quoting you. She's learning, I said. She's leading, he corrected. I didn't argue. When the applause rose, I turned down the volume. The camera lingered on her face. Calm, confident, transformed. For the first time, I didn't see my mistakes mirrored back at me. I saw continuation. Sam leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You turned a crime into a curriculum. I smiled faintly. Legacy isn't what we leave behind, Sam. It's who learns from it. He nodded, quiet for a moment. Then he gestured toward the newspaper folded on the table. You realize this story just rewrote your entire reputation, right? You're not the victim anymore. You're the matriarch of redemption. I don't care what they call me, I said, as long as she calls herself honest. Later that evening, after Sam left, I walked into my study and opened the old cedar chest one last time. Inside were the ledgers, the copies of the trust papers, the brass key that had started it all. The balance sheet from the 1960 account lay on top, its ink fading with age. The final line caught my eye. Remaining balance, 0 day 0. Every cent had been transferred into the foundation. The full weight of my father's legacy emptied not into accumulation, but purpose. I could almost hear his voice again, steady and pragmatic. Wealth isn't what you keep, Ellie. It's what you reclaim. A quiet laugh escaped me, half tear, half gratitude. You were right again, Dad. I closed the chest and locked it, the sound echoing softly through the room. That night, as rain traced the window panes, I received a message from Natalie. No greeting, no signature. Just a photo. She was standing in front of a group of scholarship recipients, all young women, smiling shyly beside her. The caption read, "First class accepted. Thank you for believing there was something left worth teaching." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back 3 words I'd never said out loud before. You earn this. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights blurred through the mist, gold and endless. Sam's words from earlier replayed in my mind. You turned a crime into a curriculum. Maybe so. But what I felt wasn't triumph. It was completion, the closing of a ledger 65 years in the making. I looked toward the fireplace, where my father's portrait hung, and whispered, "Account settled." And for the first time, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt full. The lake looked exactly as it had the summer my father built the dock. Still water, light wind, and the faint creak of boards shifting with age. I hadn't been here in years. The house had stood empty since before the betrayal, too full of ghosts for comfort and too honest for denial. Now, in early autumn, it felt like neutral ground. Natalie's car crunched up the gravel drive just after noon. She stepped out wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual armor of confidence. The wind tangled her hair. She didn't bother to fix it. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, 2 women bound by blood and bruised by the same ambition. "I didn't think you'd come," I said. She closed the door gently. I almost didn't. When she reached me, her voice dropped. "Mom." She hesitated, then blurted it out like something too heavy to hold. "I don't deserve you." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were wrong, but because they were honest. I touched her arm lightly. "You never had to deserve me, Natalie. You just had to see me." She blinked, her mouth trembling. "I do now." We didn't hug. We didn't need to. I handed her a mug of coffee and motioned toward the dock. We walked side by side, the boards groaning beneath our weight. The water was calm, a mirror stretching toward the tree line, reflecting the changing leaves, red, gold, fading green. For a while, neither of us spoke. Forgiveness doesn't arrive on command. It builds itself in silence, plank by plank. After a few minutes, Natalie said softly, "The foundation's first term starts next month. We've already funded 6 women, 2 from families that couldn't even afford application fees." I smiled. "Your grandfather would have liked that." She looked down at the rippling water. "Sometimes I feel like I'm working for him." "In a way, you are." Her eyes lifted to mine. "And for you." I nodded but didn't answer. Some things don't need acknowledgement. They just need time to breathe. A breeze rolled off the lake, carrying the faint scent of pine and something older, the kind of smell that belongs to memory. Natalie stepped to the edge of the dock, toes just touching the line where wood met water. You ever wish it had all gone differently? She asked. I thought about the company I'd built, the money stolen, the nights spent watching everything collapse, the letter from my father that changed everything. Then I looked at her, the daughter I'd nearly lost to someone else's greed, now rebuilding herself in a way that mattered. No, I said, not anymore. Her breath caught and she nodded, understanding that peace wasn't the same as forgetting. Behind us, the old house creaked, its windows glinting in the afternoon light. I'd always thought of it as my father's monument. Now, I realized it was just waiting to become mine. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Detective Claire Whitman. I stepped aside to answer. Claire. Sorry to interrupt your retreat, she said, her tone lighter than I'd ever heard it. I thought you'd want to know. The Cole investigation's officially closed. No appeals, no loose ends. You can exhale now. I smiled. You sound relieved. Let's just say I've seen plenty of endings, she said. This one feels earned. After she hung up, I stood for a moment, phone still in my hand, watching the lake shift in tiny, perfect circles. Natalie turned toward me. Everything okay? It is, I said. Finally. She smiled faintly. Good. You deserve that. I glanced at the horizon, the faint shimmer of sunlight breaking through gray clouds, warm and quiet. Thank you, Dad, I whispered. So softly the wind almost carried it away. Then I looked back at my daughter. Not the adversary she once was, not the accomplice of her own undoing, but the continuation of everything I'd fought to preserve. We stood together as the afternoon light stretched long across the water, neither of us speaking, because the silence, for once, didn't mean distance. It meant peace. And peace, I realized, was the only inheritance worth keeping. The auditorium smelled faintly of polished wood and new beginnings. The crimson banner stretched across the stage read, "The Grant Foundation for Ethics in Law, Inaugural Ceremony." Rows of students, professors, and reporters filled the seats, an audience built of curiosity and reverence. Somewhere behind the cameras, I caught the soft hum of history circling back to where it began. Natalie stood beside me at the podium, the warm light softening her face. She looked poised, but human now, not armored, not afraid. The kind of composure that comes from rebuilding yourself from the inside out. Sam sat in the front row, hands folded, that wry half-smile of his, betraying quiet pride. Detective Whitman was a few seats behind him, inconspicuous but watchful. The way people who've survived truth tend to be. The dean introduced us as a family who turned loss into legacy. The words landed like a benediction. Natalie spoke first. Her voice didn't waver. When my mother founded this program, she told me something I didn't understand until recently. That the law isn't about control. It's about conscience. She paused, meeting the crowd's eyes. This foundation exists to teach not just legal ethics, but moral courage, the kind that costs something. Applause rippled through the hall. She looked toward me. Today isn't about redemption, she said, her voice softening. It's about responsibility. To each other, to our clients, and to the truth. Then she stepped back, and it was my turn. I hadn't spoken publicly in years. The microphone waited like a dare. I looked at the sea of faces, so young, so certain that justice was an equation with clear answers. I remembered being them once. Thank you, I began, my tone measured but warm. When I was your age, I thought success was something you built. Turns out it's something you rebuild, over and over, after the world reminds you who you are. A murmur of quiet understanding rippled through the audience. This foundation isn't funded by profits, I continued. It's funded by a promise, one made 65 years ago by a man who believed that integrity was its own inheritance. A hand went up in the press section. Mrs. Grant, a young reporter called out, "Can you tell us about the origin of the funds that made all this possible?" I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of truth. "It was a deposit made in 1960, I said. "Of trust." The room went still, the kind of stillness that carries its own applause. Then slowly the clapping began. Students rose to their feet, joined by faculty, journalists, even Whitman. Natalie's eyes glistened. She turned toward me, smiling. A real smile this time, not the practiced one she used to wear at galas. The kind that starts deep and works its way upward, like forgiveness finding daylight. Sam leaned toward the stage, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. "Your father would be proud." I looked up at the balcony lights, their glow hazed by memory. "He already is," I said quietly. The applause swelled again, echoing off the high rafters. For a moment, I could almost see my father standing in the back, hat in hand, that same quiet pride in his eyes. When the ceremony ended, Natalie joined me at the edge of the stage. "Mom," she said, touching my hand, "thank you for not giving up on me." I squeezed her fingers gently. "It was never about giving up. It was about teaching you how to start again." She nodded, her smile trembling. "Then I'll keep starting." Outside, the afternoon sun spilled across the university quad, gilding the steps in gold. Reporters called questions, flashes went off, and I felt the years of silence dissolve into something weightless. We walked together through the crowd, side by side, mother and daughter, legacy and lesson, while the scholarship's first recipients clustered near the fountain, laughing with the kind of hope that can't be faked. I paused at the top of the steps and looked back at the banner fluttering in the breeze. My father's name folded quietly inside the word trust. Turning to Sam, I said the last truth left to speak. "They stole my money once, but Grandpa's account reminded me that wealth isn't what you keep." I looked at Natalie, smiling softly. "It's what you reclaim." The crowd's noise faded behind us as we stepped into the sunlight. Two women walking forward, leaving the ledger open for the next generation to write.